various figures, and at age 71, Marjorie Caldwell Hagen is starting her life all over again. Marjorie gained notoriety after being accused of killing her mother and a nurse at her family's Duluth mansion.
The heiress to a mining fortune was acquitted in that case, but a life of crime and misfortune continued for Marjorie. Now she's fresh out of prison in Arizona, and as KARE 11's Bernie Grace reports, that has some family members and friends a little nervous.
After being locked up for 12 years, Marjorie Caldwell Hagen last month finally shed her prison clothes, ducking into a john behind a locked prison gate. Since 1992, Marjorie served time at a prison outside of Phoenix.
That's her coat.
It was this fire in Ajo, Arizona that landed Marjorie behind bars. In the early 90s, there was a string of more than 30 suspicious fires. This fire at a business where Marge's RV was being repaired.
Marge Hagen's coach exploded. Just the windows blew out.
Investigators would later determine Marjorie set the blaze. Motive? She needed money. She filed an insurance claim on the gutted RV. Marjorie had grown up in big money on the shores of Lake Superior at the Glensheen mansion. She was adopted by Elizabeth Congdon, heir to an Iron Range mining fortune, a life few could imagine.
They didn't shop normally like you and I might. Things were brought in big boxes with satin ribbons. When she was first allowed for the first time to walk to school, the limousine followed her with bodyguards in it.
Marjorie has been a millionaire time and again thanks to her inheritance, yet there never seemed to be enough money. Marjorie became a household name in Minnesota in 1977 when her adoptive mother and night nurse at the mansion were murdered. Marjorie's second husband, Roger Caldwell, was convicted, but the prosecutor was convinced Marjorie was the brains behind the killings.
It was to speed up Marjorie's inheritance. I mean, they were deeply in debt at the time. They had overspent their means as she had for years.
It was Minnesota's trial of the century. While many defendants may cuss prosecutors, Marjorie always seemed to want to chat with him. One day, even baked a birthday cake for her lawyer, Ron Meshbesher, and wanted all to eat her cake.
And I said, there's no way I'm having, anything that's baked by Marjorie. And she said outright, don't worry, John, there's no marmalade in it. And it was kind of chilling in itself.
Chilling because a couple of years before the murders here, Elizabeth Congdon became severely ill following a visit from Marjorie, who fed her mother marmalade sandwiches, which her nurses suspected were laced with poison. Her mother did recover. Fearing bad publicity, the family didn't report the incident to authorities. It came to light after the murders. Following a 4-month trial, Marjorie was found not guilty of all charges. Some of the jurors befriended her for some years to come.
And it was disconcerting to see actually jurors come out of the jury box after the not guilty verdict and actually hug her.
John DeSanto, who prosecuted Caldwell, has co-authored Will to Murder. During Marjorie's murder trial, a couple she had known for years, Wally and Helen Hagen, were in court daily to support her. After the trial, with Marjorie's husband Roger locked up, she began seeing Wally. Wally's wife, Helen, ended up in this Mound nursing home.
My mom had Alzheimer's. She was bedridden. That's why she was in the nursing home.
While described as being in good physical condition, suddenly Helen slipped into a coma hours after a surprise visit from Marjorie. 4 days later, Helen died. It would later be learned Marjorie brought food to the nursing home in baby jars and fed her during that visit. Since no one knew about the earlier marmalade incident, toxicology tests were never done. Official cause of Helen's death, pneumonia brought on by dehydration. Just 4 months later, Wally and Marjorie married, although Marjorie hadn't been divorced from Roger. While Marjorie was about to inherit more than $3 million, some of her children sued, so money was tight again. Then, within a year, the Hagen's Mound home burned. After collecting insurance money, she was arrested for arson and fraud and was convicted. She went off to the Shakopee Women's Prison for 2 years. Here she was well-liked, even sent flowers weekly to the warden.
She could charm the socks off a snake, I guess.
Well, while she came off to many as sweet and caring, others saw another side.
And when she goes off, it's totally out of control. I mean, it's like a maniac. It's like somebody that you cannot imagine this kind of rage.
From the mid-'80s on, Tom Hagen and his siblings were isolated from their father, Wally, as they say Marge manipulated him first into marriage, then they moved to Arizona. Ironically, Ajo, where the Hagens settled, got its start from Marge's grandfather, Chester Congdon, who came here a century ago in the early 1900s and began copper mining. Marge, as she was known to most here, soon became involved in several churches and clubs.
She's a good friend of mine.
When I met Marge Hagen, the hair on the back of my neck stood up.
But businessman Bud Kleinfelder says Marge bounced tens of thousands of dollars in checks all across this desert town.
And if there's a fire,
In 1990, the fire beepers were busy. There were a string of blazes in Ajo. The last of the suspicious fires occurred not at Marjorie's home, but next door. The occupant came home and saw Marge stirring in the backyard where she was accused of planting on this windowsill kerosene-soaked rags. He called police. They slipped into his home, and they waited with flash cameras. Then came Marge.
And they just observed her doing it. Unfortunately, when they took the picture, the glass obscured the picture, so they didn't have that part of the evidence.
But they chased her down, and she was arrested and convicted. But before serving her time, a judge gave her 24 hours to get her affairs in order. She returned home, and the next day she called Wally's son back in Minneapolis to say his father had died.
There was different variations on how he died, and I asked, well, where's the body now? Well, he's here. It was still in the house. I said, well, Marge, you have to call the police. Well, can't the undertaker just come pick him up? I said, no.
At first, Marjorie was charged with Wally's murder, but the charge was later dropped. The two wrote a suicide pact so investigators couldn't discount Wally himself taking an overdose of drugs that claimed his life. Marjorie says at the last minute she backed out. So now, 12 years later, Marge begins over again. When she left prison, her personal effects could be carried in just a couple of boxes. But she was believed to have waiting for her nearly $1.5 million in inheritance from the Congdon fortune. While she may have money again, she apparently has few friends or relatives ready to help. This day, it was a hired limo driver who met her outside the prison gates. A couple of years ago, she told parole board members she planned to move into this adult gated community on the outskirts of Tucson. Her attorney claims she had a lot and was putting a home here, but it's still vacant, and it appears she's settling elsewhere. Just fine by the neighbors.
I guess I'd keep the fire department alerted.
Marjorie refused to talk to us. She hid under a briefcase when we approached her car. She likely chose Tucson because it's where she has fond memories as a child, schooling here in winter months, enjoying Sabino Canyon, where she waded in the brooks and hiked the hilly terrain. So Tucson, a place retirees come to winter, is the same place Marjorie Caldwell Hagen has chosen to start a new life. And while at 71 years old, she's well into her retirement years, a grown child of her last husband says at 90, she could still be an evil woman, and he believes it's only a matter of time before Marjorie and the law meet again. In Tucson, Bernie Grace, KARE 11 News.
Roger Caldwell committed suicide in 1988. Many people believe he took the real story of the Glensheen Mansion murders to his grave. That Duluth mansion is open for public tours, and just this week, a committee looking for ways to raise money for restoration began considering a plan to allow the tour guides to actually talk about the murders. Up until now, that subject has been off limits.
Might have made the tour too long.
I'm really confused.
They'd be there for a week.
Boy, okay.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah. Quick shift of subjects here. We've got a storm.